All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Off by One Security Stream. Let's give it a moment here for folks to join in. Doo-doo. I just took a look at the last video to see where things left off. And I'm just giving it a moment here for things to join. For whatever reason, StreamYard has been having problems lately. I don't know if it's the application or if it's a browser issue or Mac issue or whatever, but it's been struggling with things like getting the stream started, people joining in, and also screen sharing. Odd enough, has been a pain lately. All right, cool. Someone watching right now, if you could just give me a thumbs up that you can hear and see. I just want to make sure before I start because, like I said, been having issues with the application lately. I'm just waiting for a comment to say, I can see and hear, and we're all good. All right. It's always a weird format as well because most people on YouTube with security channels, they pre-record the videos and edit them and make them look nice, and then it airs and everything's just all nice and tight. But I do things in a different format. Obviously, we live stream just to have that interaction with people as we have different guests and things like that. So it doesn't make for a great viewing experience if you're watching it after the fact. It's obviously always better live, but it is what it is. And I'm going to start doing more videos pre-recorded just so they do look nice, and try to do some more short format stuff as well, because I think that really helps with people being able to digest the amount of content in that period of time. Okay, let's just go ahead and start up. When I did the last session, we went through the very beginning of this DarkNet Marketplace Bible. We talked about, we've spent a lot of time on operating systems. We talked about Unix and Tails, especially Unix. We talked about VPN and what the thoughts there are from different people, different perspectives. And we left off just about to get into password managers and then PGP and cryptocurrencies. So I'll see kind of how far we get in this stream. I expect that I'll probably have to do at least one more stream for this to be a part 3, because there's a lot in this document. But some of the areas I don't think I'm going to go too much into. Things around shipping and harm reduction. Obviously, that's around the illicit purchasing and shipping and payments around these products that people buy on these marketplaces, which, from my understanding, most part is narcotics. That's what people are buying. So when we get into things like shipping, I'll take a look at it and we'll read a little bit of it, but I'm not going to give much recommendations on that because that's not what I'm doing in the session for, obviously. This is all about, just to put that disclaimer out there again, because I know the YouTube bots kind of come through and the AI and such listen to these or look at the screenshots. This stream is about looking at the OpSec considerations with the DarkNet Marketplace Bible, because as I said in the last stream, it was written by a group of smart people who obviously have a pretty solid understanding of cybersecurity and confidentiality and all that stuff, covering your tracks. And it obviously is applicable across many, many areas of cybersecurity. So there's not too many documents out there that are very well written around specifically targeting OpSec. And it's interesting. I was in Orlando last week teaching a class, and I had some conversations with some other people who work in law enforcement doing this type of work. And it's just really cool to hear their stories and kind of their thoughts and what they actually do when it comes to identifying sellers on these marketplaces, or the owners of the marketplaces taking down the marketplaces, how they go about tracking and identifying who the people are via looking at cryptography, especially the cryptocurrencies. And a lot of times it's around making just one mistake. Like every time I talk to someone who works in law enforcement, and being that I am an instructor for SANS and an author for SANS, obviously I'm exposed to a lot of people that do this kind of stuff. It's just fascinating to hear that the majority of the time, the way that they're able to identify who these individuals are and take them down are due to a single or a small number of OpSec mistakes. And sometimes it's due to negligence because people get an ego or they get kind of complacent around, hey, I've been doing this for years. I haven't been caught. I'm really stealthy. I'm good at this stuff. And you get overconfident and then they make one little mistake. And that one little mistake could be you use a handle on a marketplace or on some forum like Dread that you used for Xbox Live 10 years ago or on Reddit somewhere, or there's obviously around OSINT and cyber threat intel and all these different areas, HumInt, that their job is to try and dox individuals a lot of times, right? Is trying to figure out who is this person who's trying to operate clandestinely on the dark web. And it's very difficult to have a completely separate identity without making a mistake. And one of those mistakes, we talked about VPN on the last session. VPN could be the thing that helps someone identify who you are, right? Because if you're using your IP address, like if I'm sitting right here at my house, I'm not using a VPN right now because I'm not doing any illicit activities, right? So I'm directly connected to these Tor nodes and going in. So if someone were to look at my ISP, they would be able to see that obviously since we get a DHCP lease for a long period of time, a lot of times you've got that IP address for a very, very long time, weeks, months, years. You just keep getting that lease back of that same IP address. And they can see that your system was connected to these nodes. They've mapped this stuff out. Obviously, when you think about Tor nodes and such, these are your kind of entry points and exit points in and out of the dark web, which is nothing more than a sequestered part of the internet that's got intentional kind of scrambling going on, intentional masking going on. Obviously, when we do routing and switching, it's supposed to be the most efficient possible. Like if you're dealing with OSPF or BGP, you've got these routing metrics and they are trying to make the best decision on how to get to your destination as quickly and efficiently as possible, taking into account things like bandwidth and other factors, right? Typical routing and switching. When you're going into this network, you're obviously not interested in that. You're interested in having things scrambled around. And that's why I said that I like the way that Whonix does it better than Tails, because Whonix sets up a gateway. So you've got your workstation, you've got a gateway that you're going through. And the reason it's doing that, like if you think about, well, what kind of protection is that actually giving you? It's that the operating system that you're using to navigate the dark web, to go to different sites and do your things, it will have no recollection of any IP addressing that was connected out to the real internet and into the darknet, because you've got a gateway. You're being proxied. Your IP address is an RFC 1918 private address, and if they're doing a good job, when you shut these operating systems down, they're supposed to be clearing out memory and such. One of the benefits, though, like of Tails versus Whonix that we talked about, Tails is kind of meant to be like a live operating system where you run it and it's running in memory and things are wiped and there's no persistence there. So if you wanted to save anything, you would have to put that somewhere intentionally onto like a thumb drive or whatever it is. With Whonix, if someone's running a Monero node, you're not going to use Tails for that. You're going to use Whonix for that, right? Obviously, this is all subjective, but after kind of years of, I've gone on the things that I've purchased on the dark web. I've purchased a couple pieces of malware to look at it, like ransomware, to kind of reverse engineer it, to understand what its capabilities are, or exploit kits. Most of the stuff is junk. I've also bought something that's mine, that's copyrighted, that someone's selling on the internet illegally, right? On the dark web, in these marketplaces, people are taking your books or your course materials or whatever it is you produce, and they're selling it and taking the money for it. So I've got a decent amount of experience kind of understanding how these marketplaces work. And then, of course, reading open source information. I talked a bit about the incognito marketplace on the last session. We talked about Pharaoh, the individual who got caught, right? I don't think he's been sentenced yet. He was supposed to be sentenced in March, but last I looked, I couldn't find any update to it. And some of those charges say that the minimum sentence is life imprisonment. But as we saw with the individual who ran Silk Road. He was freed, right, by Donald Trump when he came into office due to some relationship with his family, his parents. His mom, I think, is someone who was a big donator, and all. I don't know much about that, but the fact that that individual was freed early shows you that this individual Pharaoh may not face as big of charges as it seems that he might face. Again, that individual extorted people. He did a lot of horrible things and made some bad mistakes. I was talking to someone last week, and I sent them the YouTube video that Pharaoh did talking about his tool that he wrote. It was an anti-DDoS tool to protect DarkNet markets from being taken down. So how can you go about when you've got hacktivists, you've got other marketplaces, you've got law enforcement, whoever it is, trying to DOS your marketplace to take it down so it's unusable? He created a tool that protects against that. And that video is out there on YouTube. I'll put the link in the description when this thing goes onto YouTube after this, but it's just fascinating to watch that. Because if you know, after the fact, since that individual has now been caught, you can kind of look back at it and be like, wow, like it's so obvious that that guy was running a marketplace based on some of the talks that he was doing. He kept a relatively low profile, but he was very careless in some ways. And if you go and look at the court documents that are publicly available with his case, some of it's laughable. I remember on Dread, I'll show you Dread in this session, seeing quite a few postings around the mistakes that he made. Things such as being logged into his Google account and checking in on some of the servers that were involved. So I believe in this case, law enforcement was able to get access and exploit these servers, and they were able to basically clone them before Pharaoh realized that he was caught. Because obviously, if you run a marketplace and you're caught, you're probably going to go and destroy everything possible. There's also canaries there. A canary, an example of a canary is something like a little timer that's sitting there on the website and on a server. And if somebody who's an administrator doesn't go in and check in and say, hey, I'm here, and authenticate and validate to that canary, then the canary is supposed to shut things down, right? So if there's just little things, tricks like that in place, little traps in place and protections in place. So anyway, let's get moving on with this thing. I'm doing screen sharing. As I said when I started up the stream, I don't know what's going on with StreamYard or the browser or what it is, but it's having problems with screen sharing sometimes. So I was struggling at first. Now I got it to work. If it stops working, please let me know. I'm going to switch screens right now, so I can't see the comments for a little bit as I'm going through some of this stuff, but I'll try to keep switching back and check. All right, so here you can see we're back in the DNM Bible. We're under KeyPass. So obviously, if you're watching this, you're familiar with password managers. Password managers are there to make it easier for a user to not have to remember countless usernames and passwords associated with many different websites. And the old joke is a lot of admins, because they had to remember a lot of passwords, would keep a passwords.txt file somewhere on their desktop because they couldn't remember it. Or you'd see things written down on a little post-it note in a data center because people didn't want to have to remember all this. It's called your brain wallet, right? We've got cold storage, which is kind of where you're typically advised to keep your cryptocurrency out of a marketplace. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to crypto coming up. And a lot of these, when you create a crypto account, obviously you get these long recovery words. It could be 16, it could be 24, depending on what it is you're dealing with. But these are your recovery words, so that if you ever lose or lock yourself out of your cold storage wallet, or it could be a wallet inside your operating system or whatever, MetaMask, whatever, that you can regenerate the keys. You can regenerate the public-private key pair so that you'll be able to access your wallet and not lose your money. So that's why it's so important, of course, for you to record that. But that's another example of something that you need to record and you need to remember. No one's going to remember 24 words that have randomly been generated that are associated with your key pair. So people have to write them down. I remember there was this one site, I don't remember the name of it, but they would sell these metal, I can't remember what material it was, but it was something that would survive a fire and extreme heats and stuff like that. And you could get your recovery words edged on this metal plate. And then the recommendation would be, of course, you need to store that metal plate somewhere very, very secure. like inside a bank vault or something, or wherever else, because that is your last ditch effort if you lock yourself out. A lot of these wallets, these cold storage wallets, will only give you 3 attempts before it locks your wallet. So if you, maybe 5, I don't know, but if you forget your passphrase, your password to unlock the wallet, that's the only thing that's going to protect you, right? We'll get back to more about that when we talk about cryptocurrencies. But my point of bringing that up is memorization of all of these different usernames and passwords. Because one of the things that the dark web marketplaces recommend to you, and I believe this guide probably says it somewhere, is to use a different username and password on every single marketplace that you do business with. Because when you synchronize this stuff across, what you're doing is you're tying yourself to other accounts. Because if, and it does happen, if one of these marketplace servers gets taken down and a data dump occurs and that stuff gets published where anyone can access it, or if law enforcement were to seize it and they have access to it, and you're using that same username, that same account name across different marketplaces, or even worse, on places like Dread or places on the ClearNet, then you're obviously, the attribution's there, and it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to argue that that's not your account. So that's one of the recommendations, which brings us back to this point again, having to memorize all these different accounts and passwords. You can see why password wallets or managers are attractive, where you've got one main password, passphrase, that unlocks the password wallet that has access to all your different accounts. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, of course. And multi-factor authentication is often going to be an option here as well. So you need something you have as opposed to just something you know. Someone was just asking me last week when I was teaching a class around how YubiKeys in the FIDO2 specification protect you against things like in-the-middle attacks. And it's hardware-based encryption, right? It's something you have. The YubiKey is a physical thing that you have. You have to plug it into a USB port on your system typically, and it might take a thumbprint or some other way to be able to access it. But if you've gone to GitHub or Facebook or wherever, websites that support FIDO2 specification and things like YubiKeys, you will have a different public-private key pair for these different sites. So the private key, and I talked a bit about cryptography already, but just to recap, there's asymmetric key cryptography, there's symmetric key cryptography. Typically, we use asymmetric key cryptography to do key exchanges. We share or generate symmetric keys on both sides of a connection so that we can encrypt and decrypt and have that confidentiality. And I also talked a bit about how post-quantum computing is a real problem for public key crypto, just in the way in the mathematics work behind it. Solving these hard mathematical problems becomes a lot easier with quantum, right? But the number of qubits you need and such with that, like, we're not there. I think I saw somewhere that the NSA, not that we would get to be privy to that information, but by 2030, they're hoping to have a full, proper quantum computing data center supporting hundreds or thousands of qubits, which is significant. So we use symmetric key cryptography, which, if done properly, should not be as vulnerable to quantum computing and it being broken. But either way, we typically generate a public-private key pair. There was a previous session that I did where I actually walked through some of the maths with Diffie-Hellman. And we took a prime number and a generator, a public-private key pair. We did all the math and we exchanged it, and we saw that the keys were generated on both sides. So cool. But with things like dealing with a marketplace on the dark web and the communication, so the public-private key pair, your cryptography, which we'll go over soon. I'll bring up GPA and GPG, and we'll take a look at creating a public-private key pair and a key ring. They're used for different purposes. They're used for authentication. So a lot of these marketplaces are going to require, or at least they'll support multi-factor authentication, or a second factor. And that second factor is typically they will take a little passcode or something, and they'll encrypt it with your public key. So you've already gone and entered your username, you enter in your password, and then it gives you this second factor challenge, which is something that's been encrypted with your public key. You then take that, you open it up with PGP or GPG, and because your passphrase that you know gives you access to your private key, you can then decrypt that message, getting access to the code that you need to enter for that second factor authentication. So it's used for that. It's also used for the messaging between you and other people on the marketplace. So if you want to talk to a seller, you would take their public key and you would encrypt your message using PGP. So you would add their public key to your key ring. You would type up your message, you would encrypt it with their public key, and then you would paste the encrypted message into the, submission form, whatever it is you're using to exchange the message. They would then get it. They would be able to decrypt it because they're the only ones who should have access to the private key. So as you know, with symmetric key cryptography, it's a single key system. The same key is used to encrypt that's used to decrypt. But with asymmetric, it's a two-key system. The only key that can encrypt something, decrypt something that was encrypted with one of the keys is the other key. So if you encrypt with the private key, you can only decrypt that message with the public key and vice versa. Typically, you don't encrypt anything with your private key unless you're doing things like digital signatures and want non-repudiation, which we can talk more about that if it's relevant. But you get the point. Like that's why, and that's one of the problems that happened with the incognito marketplace is that they promised on their server that you don't have to encrypt the message, that they'll encrypt it for you. Trust us. Never trust anyone on the dark web, right? If you type up your message, like your mailing address or whatever it is, into that form, and you click submit or send, and you're hoping that they encrypted that message, there's a good chance they didn't, especially if they're bad actors like this individual Pharaoh was. So that means all those messages, and that's how he extorted people. He said, hey, all those messages that were supposedly encrypted because you were too lazy to encrypt it yourself, we didn't actually encrypt it. If you don't want us to do this data dump and give it to law enforcement, which law enforcement already had it, then you have to pay us thousands of dollars. There was a range of pricing that he would charge you depending if you're a buyer or a seller and depending on the amount of transactions that you did. So that's the funny part in a non-funny situation, is that they already had the servers, they already owned them. So that extortion was completely unnecessary, but a lot of people paid. You could actually go and see, people took screenshots of the web page and it would show you all the sellers and all the buyers who paid the ransom, who paid the extortion. And it was a lot, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people paying thousands of dollars. And if I remember correctly, in the law enforcement documents that are public, one of the reasons that he did that exit scam and did that extortion is because he had been hacked himself. He went to go meet some people who were supposedly going to work with him, and they somehow stole his cryptocurrency. You can read more about that in the reports, though. But I just think that's interesting. Let me take a look back real quick at the main screen and see if I miss anything. Cool. All right, cool. Nope. All right, let's keep going. So yeah, that's why cryptography is so important. That's why you need, and it's so easy to encrypt the message yourself. But again, people get lazy. Like if you do, oh, I'm doing it for a while, or I trust this site. Never trust. It could be the seller gets compromised, and that's another OpSec challenge right here. And this is one of the ways that law enforcement's able to identify some people, is because you are putting a lot of trust into a DarkNet marketplace seller, a vendor on a marketplace who is selling narcotics or whatever else they're selling. So they're not supposed to keep any of this information. Like imagine if you're doing a transaction, you need to put a mailing address in and a name in and tracking numbers. So you're hoping that the seller who's selling to dozens or hundreds or thousands of people, some of these people have been doing it since Silk Road. Like the way that works real quick, and then I'll get back to my point, is when Silk Road got taken down, there were a lot of vendors on there who were selling these illicit substances. And because of the cryptography being used, they were able to take the number of transactions that they did on like Silk Road and prove to a new marketplace owner that it's really them. And that way they keep their account name, and people know that they can quote unquote trust this individual because of the cryptography, because it's all based on the hope that that person's private key has not been compromised. Because as long as they can keep signing things, and as long as they can prove themselves and say, hey, this is really me because my signature and all is attached to this account, they would move on to different marketplaces as new ones would come on and get taken down. Like White House Market was another big one. I don't think that one got taken down by law enforcement. I think that's one of the rare few where the guy did not do an exit scam, and he also just kind of disappeared. He made enough money, and that's literally what this individual said. I made enough money. I started out with a goal. I've reached that goal. I don't want to get greedy. I don't want to screw anyone over. So I'm just going to exit gracefully and move on. But then when that big site goes down, people need to move to another site. So at any point in time, there's probably a dozen or more active marketplaces. And many of these sellers have accounts on all those different marketplaces. And because of that cryptography, they're able to show how many thousands of transactions that they've had throughout their entire history of doing this stuff. So some of these guys have had over 10,000 transactions. And that's not an exaggeration, over 10,000 transactions, meaning that 10,000 completely separate sales where somebody deposited money into the marketplace wallet, into escrow, the shipment occurred and the escrow funds got released, and that counts as a transaction. And it's just mind-boggling to me. But again, it's all based on cryptography. So back to the password manager part of this, is it the right thing to do? Like, should you use a password manager? It's a personal choice. If you follow things like Google Project Zero, you've seen that people like Tavis Ormandy have found vulnerabilities in KeyPass and other password managers out there. So obviously, they're just as susceptible to a vulnerability that could exploit the wallet and gain access to the credentials without having to provide the passphrase as any other application. Another example of a vulnerability, my good friend Steve, who has a company called Halborn, they discovered a vulnerability in MetaMask. And this one was crazy. Like I got to be privy to it before it got publicly disclosed. It would store the clear text recovery passphrase words, whatever you want to call them, the 16 or 24 words. They would be stored in plain text in memory, and it persisted after a reboot. Like that's crazy. When you would start the browser, Firefox back up, MetaMask plugin, for whatever reason, your stuff would be in clear text in memory. So anybody with volatility or another memory scraping tool could get access to that. Like that, these mistakes are made a lot, and it's scary, right? But the password managers, the benefit to it is you don't have to remember all these different accounts, and it will in fact make it easier for you to have a different username and password on each account or each web page or marketplace or whatever it is. But everything's based on that one password that is in your brain wallet, unless you wrote it down somewhere. A lot of people will encrypt the passwords with, just like a password manager would do. They would do it with something like a PGP or some other tool. So there's a lot of ways that people do this. Like if you trust yourself and you think you can remember all these different accounts in your head, then that's obviously the best place to store it, is in your brain. But if you forget it, or even if you temporarily forget it, you might lock yourself out of something and not be able to recover that. Now, if you've got the recovery words, you can do it, of course, but this is a personal choice, right? I don't use Password Manager personally. I've got a pretty solid brain wallet. At least it hasn't failed me yet. There's been a couple times where I've locked myself out of something, but the way that I create passwords is something that only I would know, right? Like we've gone through the era or multiple eras of what's the best type of password. Does it need to have uppercase, lowercase, letters, numbers, and special characters? Does it need to be a certain length? Should it have spaces in it? Should it be multiple words instead of a single word? There's a lot of opinions that have come out over the years. For me personally, it's passphrases. It's multiple words with a phrase that is only something I would know. And a silly example, you could say, I want to take the Canterbury Tales. If you remember that, like Wandarapa with the Sherry Sota, the Draw to March, Persa to the Rota, whatever it was. I remember that from high school. No one's going to know, especially if you do something like, I'm going to take the second line in the Canterbury Tales and I'm going to reverse the words, and it's going to be 8 words, and that's going to be my password. Like, that's something that's easy for you to remember because it doesn't have all these special characters. And obviously you can use those to help you out if you think that's the case. But it should be something that's easier to remember and very difficult for anything trying to crack. Because think about it, like the different password cracking techniques out there. You've got dictionary attacks, which we're far past that. I mean, yeah, there's still some people out there that probably use very simple passwords that is something very obvious, like the name of their dog or their favorite sports team or something like that. There are people that do that, and then they might add a couple of numbers on the end because they had to. So a lot of people still are doing weak passwords. But then you've got rainbow table attacks, which rainbow table attacks are good when there's not a salt. I'm sure you're familiar with what a salt is. A salt is like a unique string of characters that was generated just for you, for your account on that Linux box. So that if I have a password that's monkey and somebody else has a password that's monkey, and we're using SHA-256 to hash the passwords, even though our passwords are the same, what's stored in Etsy Shadow is not going to be the same because we each have a unique salt, and that salt is only accessible by UAD0. And Microsoft doesn't use salts. Like with Windows, they do a handshake, right? If you use NTLM version 2 or whatever, there's a handshake that's going on, and that access the salt. But what's stored in the SAM database is not salted. That's why it's easier to crack Windows passwords if you can get access to that. Rainbow tables fail when there's salt involved because you would have to generate a whole new set of tables with that salt in mind. I'm not going to go into how rainbow tables work in detail, but it's basically pre-calculates every possible hash within that authentication protocol and password tool. Like some older, if you go way back on Windows to LAN Manager, that was a really terrible password authentication mechanism, protocol, whatever you want to call it. It would split your password, if I remember, into 2 7-character pieces. Anything longer than 14 would get truncated and didn't count. It would make everything uppercase. So even if you use uppercase, lowercase, it didn't matter because it uppercases everything. And it stores it as 2 separate 7-character hashes, which a rainbow table destroys that because a rainbow table pre-calculates, pre-computes every possible password, taking into consideration the limitations of that protocol or mechanism. For example, if you create a password mechanism that a manager that only allows the password to be 14 characters long, then you can create a rainbow table that never checks for anything longer than 14. You're greatly reducing the amount of pre-computation that has to occur. And then if we also take out the uppercase, lowercase thing, because everything's uppercase, then we can remove that. And it makes it so what we have to pre-compute is much less than what you think it would be. Now, if you're dealing with something modern and your password can be 100 characters and it can be any combination of characters, uppercase, lowercase, whatever, pre-computing that becomes very, very big. And the way that these tables are created, when I say pre-compute, it actually does this cool thing called a reduction function where it goes in and I don't want to go into details there. Go on Wikipedia or something if you want to check it out. But it uses these reduction functions, and it's able to represent, like, you can have a chain of 10,000 passwords represented only by the first one and the last one. And it's able to inflate these chains. And it's pretty cool to read about how that works. If you want to go check that out, go check out Rainbow Tables. But with hashes, that's not going to be something that helps us out here. But going back to what I was saying, long passphrases or passphrases that are very difficult for someone to guess, but easy for you to remember, especially if you do a little trick in there too, like reverse the characters or the words or add in a couple extra things in there that's easy for you to remember. We get into the final password technique, which is cracking technique, which is brute force. Now, there's other techniques, but these are the main ones, right? Password attack, dictionary attack, like rainbow table attack, brute force attack. There's other ones, but a brute force is, at the end of the day, something that's always going to be successful at some point in time. We can brute force the key space. It depends on how big the key space is, how long it's going to take. That's what's good with something like AES and the way they designed that algorithm, the Raindahl algorithm, which is the AES standard algorithm. They made it so that they can always double the size of the key space. So if we're at AES 256, we can double that to 512. We can double that to 1024. And what you're doing is you're making the key space so large that even with quantum key cryptography or quantum cryptography, cracking that is not something that's going to happen in a realistic amount of time. Now, obviously, that depends a lot on how easy your password is, because there's going to be hybrid attacks as well with password cracking, where they can take a little bit of word lists and a little bit of random and brute force and kind of work those things together. Similar how do we do fuzzing, right? So if we can take as much information about this person as possible, like what sports they like, what the kids' names are, their pets' names, where they grew up, their high school, their work, everything about them, all that information can get fed into a little table that we can say, try these first, like try combinations of these words, and then take in some randomness or take in some substitution of an I with a 1, a 0 with the O, and all that kind of stuff, right? And then they'll have good luck with that. That's why it's really important that your password is not something that is related to something people can find out pretty easily about you. But that's a whole nother thing. We're going to move on from this because I'm taking too long on this, but I just wanted to make sure we covered that. If we go into PGP now, I haven't clicked on anything in a while, like probably, okay, it's working. A lot of times your connectivity on the dark web will start to fail if you're on there too long and you have to like reboot and stuff. So PGP, I said earlier that cryptography, we typically use asymmetric key cryptography with the public-private key pair to generate or exchange a symmetric key that's going to be used on both sides of a connection to encrypt and decrypt data, because symmetric key cryptography is much faster than asymmetric key cryptography. That's why we use asymmetric to exchange the keys, the symmetric key that we use for encryption, because it's much faster. It's a single key system. The key size is smaller. And especially when you're dealing with large amounts of content. Imagine if I have an RDP session, remote desktop protocol a session, and I'm just sending lots and lots of data back and forth. Like, we want what's going to be fast and secure and confidential. But with things like what we're talking about here, you heard me already mention that asymmetric key cryptography is actually used a bit more than just for exchanging keys. But you've got to do it right. So I'm going to go over to, we're going to bring up GNU Privacy Advisor, I think it stands for. It's basically a little front-end GUI for GPG. GPG is based on PGP, Phil Zimmerman's pretty good privacy tool that came out a long time ago. And I think, don't hold me to it, but I think even with PGP, when you want to use PGP for email, and I could be wrong, I know that it uses this, it does it this way in some cases at least, but when you're using PGP you've got a key ring and you've got this web of trust and you've got all these different people that are all using PGP, everybody's going to exchange their public key with everybody else. And on your key ring is going to be the public key for everybody else. And if I want to send you a message, as I described earlier, you would normally think that I would encrypt that message with the public key of the recipient, and they would decrypt it with their private key. But in a lot of cases, that's not actually how it's done. What actually happens is we create a symmetric key on the fly. We don't, the tool does. It creates a symmetric key on the fly, and it encrypts the message body or the attachment, the content, with that symmetric key. And then that symmetric key is encrypted with the recipient's public key. So then what you're sending to the recipient is a symmetric key that was encrypted with their public key that they will then decrypt with their private key, gets them access to the symmetric key that they can then use to decrypt the data. So there's different ways this can work. But let me go ahead and bring up GNU Privacy Advisor here. Give me a second. Bring up a command shell. All right. I'm just going to type in GPA. And that's the GNU Privacy Advisor. And it pops up. I know it's kind of small on the screen. I apologize for that. There's not really anything I can do on this system to enhance that or increase it. But you see it's got a ribbon bar up there. It's a pretty simple tool. And if you hover over it, it tells you what it is. Check signatures of text. So you can take things in your clipboard, paste the clipboard contents into here, and click the decrypt button. And as long as you have the key to decrypt that message, it'll prompt you for your passphrase. You type in your passphrase, which gets you access to the private key that can then be used to decrypt the message. Now, we do sometimes use our private key to encrypt something, but that usually has to do with digital signatures for non-repudiation. So if we go back to the email example, like I have this key ring and I've got a bunch of people's public keys on my key ring and they've got my public key, and I want to encrypt something to send to them, we can do that. We already talked about that. But what if I just want to prove to everybody that I want to send a message to that it did in fact come from me? Then we sign it. How we sign it is we take a hash, so like a SHA-256 hash of the message, of the contents of the message that we're sending, and we encrypt the hash of the message with our private key. It's one of the only times you'll use your private key like that. We encrypt the hash of the message body with our private key, and then we send that out. Now, digital signatures can come in different formats and specifications, like X509 is an example of one. So there's standards out there. So you follow one of these standards, and that signature is going to have like different metadata in it and fields associated with it. But either way, what that allows people to do then is use your public key to decrypt the hash that was encrypted with your private key. And because you're the only one that has access to that private key, they know now that it came from you. So non-repudiation, you can now trust that I'm the one that sent a message unless my private key got compromised. Now, you can go higher than that because this is all based on trust, right? Who is the authority who is signing on behalf of and advocating for the people in this ring? PKI, public key infrastructure, is an example of one, and there's standards there where you have certificate authorities. Now, a certificate authority can be someone like VeriSign or Entrust, one of these companies out there that are like official certificate authorities. That's the ones used mostly by your browser. Your browser supports all of them. And there will be a root CA, a root certificate authority, that's typically offline. You don't want your root server to be online, because if that thing gets compromised, the whole thing falls apart. So you designate a subordinate certificate authority that has the authority to sign on the root's behalf, because the root signed on behalf of the subordinate. So if you want to go and register a domain, go to Let's Encrypt, for example, and you want a new HTTPS certificate, SSL cert, something's got to sign that. And usually there's a know your customer, KYC component to it, where you have to prove that you are who you say you are. And that may be very basic stuff and not very interesting or trustworthy, or it could be something a lot more involved. Like you've got to show your driver's license or your passport and prove that you are this individual, because that root, that authority, whatever, is signing that you are who you say you are. And it works the same way that I was just describing in PGP, where if I sign something with my private key and you know it's from me, but if you require that there be an authority there, then we need this trust, right? Let's move on from that. Right now, I'm going to say file. And actually, let's see here. I'll go to my keyring manager. You can see there's just a default key in there, which is fine. I'm going to go in and say that I would like to generate a new key. So we're going to say new key here. I know it's small, but it's asking for my name. So I'll just say Bob Dole. We say forward, email address. Now, typically on the dark web and stuff, people are going to use a Proton mail address or similar. So I'll just put Bob Dole at proton.me. We go forward. Create a backup copy. Do you want to do that? I'll just say do it later. Now, that's not good practice. Obviously, I'm just trying to expedite this. And then it says the key is being generated. Now, here's an important part. It's asking me for my passphrase. I know you can't read it probably, but it's a little box that says, please enter your new passphrase. This is important because this is going to be the one thing that governs access to the key, the public-private key pair that's protecting your private key, that has the ability to decrypt things, right? So I'm just going to do a fake one now because I'm not worried about being secure right now. All right, so I did that, and it says your key is being generated. So the key is generated now. Sometimes, depending on the tool, it'll have you do things because it's looking for entropy to generate these keys. So there's no predictability, and someone can't guess what the key pair would be. So a lot of times it'll pull from CPU cycles and clock. It'll use from mouse movement, keyboard strokes, other things that are happening to generate the key pair. So, okay, we've got this key now. We're actually going to use it on a marketplace soon. So that's going to be the best way for us to kind of understand how this works. But I only have this key. Now, if I wanted to buy something on a marketplace, it's going to require that I upload my public key. It's going to require, obviously, that I have the public key of the person I'm buying something from, because we're going to have to exchange messages back and forth. So let's do that now, even though we're kind of jumping ahead. I just think it's a good time to do it. I'm going to try to go to a marketplace, and we're going to try to create an account on one to see what this looks like and see what kind of security is there. Now, I'll put this warning out now. When we go to a marketplace, you're going to see illicit substances that are being sold. It's just the way it is. It's what it's there for. Now, there's not just that being sold. Some of them will have hacking tools. Some of them will sell fake money. So you can buy like fake currency. Some of them will sell stolen products and goods. There's a lot of things, but usually the majority of the time it's drugs. I hope that YouTube algorithm or something doesn't strike it because it sees that. But we're not. We're doing this presentation, this session, as an OpSec tool on how to securely communicate and mistakes that people sometimes make that results in them being doxxed or identified. We are not advocating for purchasing anything at all. This is just educational, saying this stuff for the YouTube thing. Let me just check the messages here. Okay, cool. All right, let's do this. So I'm going to go, in order to do this, we're going to go to Dread. So I went to Dread earlier because a lot of times it takes forever to connect to it. You have to imagine sites like this are getting DDoSed all the time. There's people trying to take these sites down. One of the tricks that the marketplace owners will do is that they'll create a unique URL for each account user. Now, they probably require that user actually buy things and prove that they're a real customer and not a bot, but they'll give you your own private domain, onion site, because that's not going to be something that's publicly known. Obviously, these marketplaces, they want to be found because otherwise they can't sell anything. So there are going to be places you can go to get the onion addresses of these marketplaces. Those are the addresses that the DDoS occurs against, because they would never know what these one-off domain names are because there's nowhere to find them. and it's a weird address. You'll see in a moment. So just keep that in mind. That's how they try to survive the DDoS attacks, is by having alternate sites. So this is Dread. This is a place that law enforcement is definitely on a lot, because there are tens of thousands of users on here, probably hundreds of thousands of users. And most of the activity that goes on this website is illicit. Now, there are, just to speak up for privacy advocates, there are people that are simply just that. They're privacy advocates. They don't think that anything that they're doing or other people are doing should be monitored by the government or anyone else. That's why we have things like the EFF, who are trying to protect privacy. But unfortunately, a lot of its use is for illicit activities. Now, this site was based on Reddit. So Dread is kind of like a Reddit for the dark web. It's been around for a while. There's always kind of questions around who actually owns it. Is it the feds? Is it trustworthy people? Obviously, you never know. You have to imagine that anybody on here or any marketplace could absolutely be law enforcement, because they're supposed to be there. They're trying to stop people from doing bad things. But you can see there's different categories here. Like Monero, you can see right there, there's 62,230 subscribers just to the Monero page or subdread. That's all talking about the cryptocurrency Monero, because Monero is the currency that you should be using if you're trying to not be traced. Bitcoin was used on Silk Road, and that's one of the reasons that it's so easy to trace what's happening, because everything's public on the blockchain. And there's blockchain explorer tools. There are vendors out there that make, if you haven't seen them, like OSINT tools specifically for tracking and tracing transactions. Because a lot of times what happens is, if someone is trying to move money and launder money and do illicit activity, and there's large sums of money going by, that's going to alert people. There are absolutely people scraping these blockchains looking for transactions that reach a certain threshold. And if it's Bitcoin, they can track everything that happens. So there are tools out there. If someone's moving, let's say 100 Bitcoin, which is a significant amount of money, right? Say it's like 10 million bucks or whatever, and $10 million goes, it's going to get noticed. And then what these people will do is they'll try to use coin mixers, coin joins, mixers, or other names for it, to try and scramble things, move the money around in small amounts. Sometimes it goes between different currencies, between lots of different wallet addresses that were created specifically for that purpose, for that specific moment, and stuff gets moved around. But since everything's public on public ledger, right, on the blockchain, it's trackable, it's traceable. Monero, especially with the latest fork that happened about a year and a half ago, I want to say, is very secure. I don't know. I've not seen any attack against Monero that's meaningful. There are some attacks where they can try to make it so a duplicate transaction ID gets used for something, or there's other little things you can do, but really it's extremely secure. The way the cryptography works with Monero and these rings and such, it's very interesting. It's quite technical as well. If you want to go read about it, it's all publicly available information. But after talking to countless law enforcement and just experts in the space of cryptocurrency, I've not heard of one example where someone's been able to crack it. It's usually people getting caught because if you've got money in a Monero wallet, you can't just go cash that out. Like, there's Bitcoin stores and ATM machines, right? Cash machines. You can go and cash out money, but that people are going to see it. And that KYC thing, the know your customer thing, that's a requirement for crypto exchanges nowadays. It wasn't always there, but it's usually there now. Now, there are certainly crypto exchanges in other countries that you can use that aren't going to require the KYC component. But still, I mean, people are watching, right? So KYC means if I sign up for an account on, say, Binance, or Kraken or another one, they need to have my information or they're not going to let me deposit money or exchange money. You think about how are you going to get money into that account in the first place? If you're wiring it from your bank account, that is easily trackable. And then if you use that money to buy Monero, that's easily trackable. What you do at that point is where it starts to become interesting. If you then move that money from your Monero wallet on the exchange into cold storage, a wallet that you generated on a cold storage wallet or on a soft wallet in your browser plugin or on your Linux operating system, no one knows what that wallet is, right? You've generated that. It's a unique wallet that's only associated with you, but you doesn't really exist if it's just a random string of characters, right? No one knows it's attributed to you. Now, what people will do a lot of times is they'll move money around into different wallets. So none of that stuff's traceable because of how secure Monero is. Those exchanges and transaction IDs, it's not possible to associate it with who is the owner of this wallet. But the point again, though, is at some point, you're going to need to cash that money out. And how are you going to do it? You're going to have to exchange it with another currency or sell it for money, right? For cash. And that's when you're going to get seen. So you would have to go and do that on an exchange that doesn't have the KYC component. And there are ways people try and do it and stuff like that. But obviously the government wants to tax your crypto movement, the money you're making off it. And that's the first question you get asked in the United States on your tax form is, have you done any crypto this year? Have you sold or purchased any crypto? They want their money, right? The tax on it. So it's getting more and more difficult. But anyway, we'll save more of that when we get to cryptocurrencies. Here we are on Dread, and what we're going to do is go to market. So right here, DarkNet markets, 150,000+ subscribers. We click on this. This is going to be the sub-Dread that is supposed to list all the different marketplaces that are publicly available. Now you can see help verifying market onion. Why is cannabis so cheap on these markets? Avoid ordering from Trip to Magic until we hear back from them. You'll see messages like that a lot because a lot of these marketplaces do exit scams, right? Rug pulls, exit scams. So a lot of times the owner of a marketplace will just disappear. And who knows why they disappeared, but sometimes they disappear because they're doing an exit scam. So what people will do is post here and say, hey, warning, do not buy anything right now on this marketplace because something dodgy is going on. Happens all the time. So right here, it says get market links at .link. This is what I mean by when I said the DDoS is a problem, because these marketplaces, they want to be known so that people can go sign up and buy stuff from them. But that's the ones that are going to get DDoSed. So if you look over on the left here, I know it's kind of small. I'll try to increase the font a little bit. You can see we got Dread, Recon, Daunt. That's the site we're on. This is just a repository for all these different DarkNet links, marketplaces, and other things. DarkNet Bible, that's what we're looking at right now, right? So these are markets because Abacus, Dark Matter, Elysium Market, Archetype, whatever that is. So there's not too many listed here. There was a time when there was a lot of them listed on sites like this, but it always seems to be just a few, like a handful now. And then everybody starts using this handful of sites, and then one of them goes down. And they go down because law enforcement got them, or they do an exit scam. Like that's usually the two ways they go down. And when they go down, everybody migrates to the next best market, and then a new market will pop up. Now, who are these people creating these marketplaces? They're usually very technically savvy people and very security oriented. Like this individual, Pharaoh, Lin, whatever his name was, from Taiwan, he was only like 22 years old, I think, when he started the market, maybe even younger. So really smart kid who wanted to make money and did it the wrong way, right? So he created this marketplace. He was smart about it too, because imagine if you wanted to create a marketplace and no one knows who you are. You don't want anybody to know who you are. But at the same time, you need to earn credibility and trust and respect from people who are very suspicious and paranoid because of the activity they want to do. You're trying to attract sellers to want to sell on your marketplace. You're trying to attract buyers to want to buy on your marketplace. So how do you earn that trust? One of the things this guy Pharaoh did is he used Dread as a way to like build up trust. He kind of crowdsourced some of the ideas around, what do you guys think I should do with this market with regard to this or that? And people started to feel like, hey, this guy seems like a good one. He seems trustworthy. And he continued to do that. And then slowly some sellers start signing up for accounts. He probably offered free for some sellers initially to join his marketplace, because usually these darknet market owners will charge sellers to want to sell on their marketplace. Like, you have to pay $5,000 in cryptocurrency, whatever it is. So in order to attract some initial people, I imagine he probably went to some big sellers and said, hey, I've been crowdsourcing this marketplace. I'm going to be charging this amount for new accounts, but I want to give you for free because I respect you. You've been around for a long time. And then as other sellers see some of the big dogs move over, they're going to be like, okay, I'll sign up there too. So I imagine that that's how the whole thing began. So anybody can start one of these things, but you've got to be somebody. I mean, I think you got to be crazy. First off, you got to be someone who's unethical. And when I say unethical, I really mean it, because if you start one of these marketplaces, there were over 100,000 fentanyl deaths in the United States last year. Where do you think a lot of this stuff gets moved? Right here on these marketplaces. And you might say, like, no, it's all the people on the street. There's a lot of homeless people and addicts and stuff on the street doing this. Yeah, but those sellers on the street, they're getting it from somebody who got it from China through Mexico and bought thousands and thousands of pills at once with fentanyl in them. And then these buyers are coming on and buying it from the sellers to go push it on the street or for personal consumption. And you are literally tied to the deaths of people if you start one of these marketplaces. You don't have to agree with me, but that's how I feel about it, because it's a serious problem. So let's click on one of these and see what happens. Is where get into some risky territory. So we're going to the one called archetype tip, whatever it is. Now you'll see that a lot of times, looks like my mouse is acting weird right now. Oh, okay, give it back, I think. Okay, there we go. Phew. You'll see a lot of times that these sites they'll hang and they don't work. So we just got taken to a page that shows you a bunch of different mirrors. And look at that, updated 2 years ago. So this place has been around for a while. These links have been around for a while, and those are the ones that are going to be DDoS most likely. You can see it's been visited 388,000 times. This page has been looked at. So it says verify over here. If we click on verify, I'm hoping this thing isn't crapping out. Okay, good. So it says PGP sign verification. This gets us back into what we're talking about right now. This signature is something that we should be able to validate. So you can probably go to Dread. Each marketplace is going to have their own sub-Dread, and they're going to put their public keys up there. So you can take the public key and you can verify this signature. And that's why they put this here, so that you can trust that it is the marketplace that put this stuff there, that created these links, and it's not somebody bad. Obviously, it could be somebody bad from the start. I would have to imagine that law enforcement owns multiple marketplaces out there, because it's smart to do, right? If you're a law enforcement, you create a marketplace and you build that trust, you get lots of sellers. You can watch for people that make mistakes. And I imagine also that law enforcement, their biggest priority are marketplace owners and the sellers, the big sellers there that are moving a lot of this stuff. Less so for the buyers, but I imagine if you're a buyer buying hundreds of thousands of pills, that they're going to want to look at you too, because they know what you're doing. You're going and selling this stuff on the street or through the mail. All right, so we clicked on one of the links. We're going to see if it actually gets there or not. As I've said a couple of times, often these things die. So here it says, how much is 3 plus 7? So it's a little bot check, right? So we put 10. Sometimes the captchas that you'll see for these marketplaces are pretty intense. So click into the circle with a cut is what it says on this captcha. Now, I don't know about you. It looks bad, I'm sure, on your screen. It looks really bad on my screen too. I see some circles, but I don't see any with a cut in it. So I'm just going to try to click on one and hope I get lucky. There you can see more PGP signatures. Now it's saying how much 8 plus 3. So I got the wrong circle. So I'm going to say 11. probably take us to another CAPTCHA. Yep. It says click into the circle with a cut. Okay, this one right here I can see has a cut. So let's click on that one. All right, and we passed the CAPTCHA check, right? But now we've got more stuff here. So it's asking for a username, password, log out time, and then it's got this sequence. It's got the onion address, and it says again, click in the circle with a cut. I need to create an account though. I don't have an account. All right, it seems to be hanging a little bit again. I'm hoping it unlocks here. Uh-oh. It was just working, and now it's mad. All right, so I'm hoping this comes back. Okay, it let me click finally, I think. Yeah, there we go. So public key. So right now it wants my public key right off the bat. So we're going to go over to PGP or GPG. And let's see here. This is my key for Bob Dole. I'm going to copy, no, not my private key. Let me export my keys real quick. I'm just going to put it in here called key.temp. Now, we would not do this normally, but this is all dummy account. Select the folder. Yeah, my user folder. Okay, so let's go over to my command prompt now. Open up a new terminal. And we're going to say cat key.temp. So what I did was I exported just my public key because we wouldn't want to save our private key in a clear text like that. Uh-oh. Drag and drop operation failed. Okay, let me try it again. All right. I copied my public key. I hope that worked anyway. And let's paste our public key in here. All right, there's a public key. Display name. It's active. Okay, here we go. I want to say Bob Dole 23. I just imagine that there's a Bob Dole already on there. So Bob Dole 23. That's my display name. Login name. Okay. Bob Dole 23. Password. We'll put solid, and then we'll put 23, 23, 23. There we go. And yeah, of course, this is my domain password. So just kidding. Solid 23, 23, 23. A PIN number. So I need a PIN number too. And that's used to authorize withdrawal from the market is what it says. Anything from 4 to 16 characters. I'll put 23, 23. I'm doing all the things from OpSec you would never do. Referral, no. And click on a circle with a cut. Let me see if that worked. I hope I don't have to enter everything in again. Okay, so now it says PGP decrypted message. I'll zoom in a little bit. So what it wants me to do is copy this message and then to decrypt it using my public key, my private key. So this has been encrypted with the public key that I uploaded to the site. So you're going to make sure we got everything. And then we're going to copy this. We're going to go back to GPG. And here is where we click on the clipboard icon. We're going to paste the contents in. All right. And then we're going to say decrypt. It wants my passphrase. And we decrypted it. So the reason we were able to decrypt that, of course, is because the market encrypted this message to us with our public key, and we're the only ones with our private key. So you're seeing like firsthand how it uses PGP on the web here. So right now it says copy the URL from above, browse to it in your browser to sign up. Copy the URL from above, browse to it in your browser to sign up and register the account. Okay, so I guess this is some kind of a one-time URL that's going to allow me to continue signing up my account. All right, let's go here. Let's paste that in. All right, there we go. Let's see if it works. All this work just to get a stupid account on this site we'll never see again. All right. Let's see what it's saying here now. Read the whole captcha to solve this. Compare every URL in the image and this page with the URL inside your browser URL. Click onto your display name shown in the image below. Okay, there's my display name right there. So it's another captcha. It's like the fourth captcha we've seen. Well, okay, so our registration was successful. This is your XMR deposit. So this site only allows Monero as the cryptocurrency. And here's another captcha. So what it wants us to do is save this Monero address because it's going to be what we use to deposit money if we want to buy something. So this is a wallet address that's owned by the marketplace. So when we go to escrow, this is the address we would send our money to. Now, this address is associated with our account, but it's under the master account wallet of the marketplace owner. So escrow is nothing more than the marketplace's wallet. All that money is sitting there in their wallet, which is why they do an exit scam sometimes when there's a lot of money in escrow. They build up a big customer base and seller base. They wait till they get millions of dollars in escrow, and then they just run. They take the money. There's nothing you can do about it. So it wants us to enter in pieces of the address, the Monero address, and enter in the missing pieces. So ZWWK is right there. We need to enter in MKS8. It's not letting me click in there. Oh, don't die on me now. We were getting so close. It's not letting me click inside these little spots so that I can enter the character. Oh, no, it wants it there. My fault. I thought it wanted me to enter it in there. Okay, so ZWWK MKS8. So MKS8, and then 6SNZ TOU capital S. TOU capital S. So that's our fifth captcha. See what happens now. If we actually, okay, what's it saying now? Good to know. Now that you're verified your deposit address, we'll explain to you the basics. So it's telling you to use PGP, payment system support, your first deposit. Your first deposit to the market should be a couple cents. Make sure they land here before you deposit more. I don't have any Monero. All right, let's go to the settings. Where are we at now? Vacation mode, currency, defaults to euro. So I guess I'm assuming that this marketplace is run out of Europe. Page English, compare below with your browser. Click the circle with a cut to continue. Wow, another one I have to go through. So let's click on this guy. So you can see it's asking us again and again to verify that the address in the URL is the one that's shown here, which is pretty wild. Change settings. Okay, I didn't want to change settings. Okay, so now let's go to the market. That was ridiculous. Market. Here's where we might see something that, yeah. So right there, I'm going to actually move the screen a little bit to not show some of this stuff because I don't want YouTube to strike it. But here you can see the kind of stuff that's being sold. And over here on the left, you can see there are all these different categories. I'll try to zoom in a bit. All these categories down here, man, they don't sell anything but that. So there's not even an option for hack tools or something. I was hoping that we would see something like hack tools that we can click on it and see what kind of stuff they're selling. We'd have to do another one for that, and I don't feel like going through that process. What I'll do is for the next stream, I'll find one that has hacking tools and we can take a look at that. But this is how you would go about doing that, right? And let's say that we wanted to buy something. So I'm just going to click on this. Promoted. So you can even pay to have your stuff promoted. It's just like the real regular, eBay and stores online. They all have ratings associated with them and reviews. So obviously people want to have a good review so that they can build up trust and their customers. So they want probably 5-star reviews. So here it says buy product. You could buy the amount, all that stuff. Okay, I want to get out of here soon. I don't like being here. I was just looking for the option to buy so we could see what it says. All right, let's just click on that. I just want to see what the transaction looks like, what it wants from us. All right, so it says 19 euro 34 pence per pack, 1 times. Here it says Royal First Class Mail. So here's where the shipping address. So it says shipping details will be automatically encrypted. This is exactly what the guy from Incognito said and lied about. You would not enter in clear text here, especially stuff like your address, and click send, assuming that they encrypt it. We're going to stop here on this place because I don't want the video to get struck or anything like that, even though we're talking about ethical things and not doing this stuff. But let's just close that tab and then go back over to here. So if we wanted to do that manually, we would just bring up the clipboard here and we would delete everything in there and just type our message. So we'd say Bob Dole at 123 Fake Street in Los Angeles, California, whatever. And then you would say, I want to encrypt that. So here you've got encrypt the buffer text. You would select the key you want to encrypt it with. You would say, okay, and there's your message. So this has now just been encrypted with our the recipients. So for this one, what I missed, what I would have had to have done is download the public key of that seller. I didn't do that. So I just clicked on myself. I basically just encrypted this with my own public key. So what you would normally do is get the public key of that other person, click on that and encrypt it with that. And then they can decrypt it with their private key. You cannot decrypt it with any other key at that point. All right, so let's get out of here. That is how, if we go back to the DNM Bible, that's the PGP section. I just wanted to walk through it with example instead of walking through it through the text here. But it goes through everything we just talked about. Creating a key pair, we did that. Importing a public key, you just copy and paste it into that manager. Encrypting a message, we just did that. Verifying a message, we had to do that when we authenticated to the marketplace. Decrypting a message, signing a message. So signing is the only thing we didn't do, but that's again where it takes your private key and it encrypts the hash of the message that you're sending, so that when the recipient decrypts the message with their private key, they would then hash that message that's decrypted, and they would compare it against the hash that was encrypted with your private key, because they would decrypt it with their public key. And if the hashes match, they know that it came from you. I mean, obviously they don't, because your key could have been compromised. We don't have any certificate authority here, but it's much safer than not signing, right? Let's talk a little bit about cryptocurrencies and then we'll stop, because we've already been going an hour and 20 minutes here, which is crazy how time flies. I talked quite a bit about crypto already, so we don't have to spend too much time. Bitcoin, you would not use any coin but Monero if you were doing something from an OpSec perspective, because again, Monero is the only one that is not traceable on the blockchain. The transactions and the attribution is not there like it is with other cryptocurrencies. But let's talk about how Monero works. So you would, if it's not there already, you would install Monero on your operating system. And I did that in preparation for this. So let me go in. I got to remember where I put it. No, it's not there. Oh, temp Monero. So in here, I downloaded the Monero application. You can see a Monero wallet GUI. So let's run it. And it's going to bring up the GUI. It's going to ask for our password. Oh, man. Okay, phew. I was worried I forgot the password. Even though I said earlier, I don't never forget passwords. Well, I do when they're fake accounts, because they're not even accounts I'm going to use. So here you can see it says starting the node. So by default, when you have the Monero client like this, it is going to synchronize with a public Monero node. So basically you're trusting, and this is another one of the areas I guess you could say that there could be a vulnerability that you have to worry about. It's not a vulnerability in Monero. It's just a vulnerability in how you use Monero. The best way to do it is to have your own local Monero node, but it's huge. It's massive. Like, I can't remember how big. It's many, many, many hundreds of gigabytes. And you basically have a copy of the entire history of Monero on that thing. And when you do a transaction, you don't need to use someone else's node is what you're doing. Like right now, I'm synchronizing. You can see it says wallet blocks remaining. So I'm synchronizing with some remote node, and you can change the nodes. There are places that you can go that have a list of nodes, and they're rated by trust. Now that trust, who's saying that they're trustworthy? If you're doing it here, it's going to be people in places like Dread saying, hey, these nodes are owned by these users. They'll have their username there. And you can validate with the signatures and such that we talked about with cryptography. And those are trusted people because you can see that they have a long history on Dread or a long history with these marketplaces. And then you would use their node. Now, these nodes aren't always online all the time. So there's actually a page that you can go to that shows you the uptime and availability of these various publicly reachable nodes. And if you run your own node, obviously you can allow others to use your node, or you can just keep it for yourself. What it's doing, though, is it's removing that potential risk of using a remote node that's owned by an untrusted party. And with that, they have a little bit more information than a normal person would by watching publicly what's happening on the blockchain. So they could try to do an attack like basically kill your transaction while it's underway to make you do it again. And I'd have to look at the details around the attack. I don't want to misspeak, but it has something to do around using duplicate transaction IDs and there being a potential vulnerability of some level of exposure by doing that. A lot of people will generate a new wallet for every single transaction. So right now, if we click on receive, you can see that I've got this primary address and one that says temp September. So the last time that I used this operating system, I was doing a stream, I think with David Bombal or something like that. And I was showing a little bit of Monero on there. So that's what that's there for. So if we want to create a new one, it's simple as click on create new address. You can select a label and say April 2025. This wallet then falls underneath, it's one of the addresses in my wallet. And anybody that sends money to any three of these wallets, I get that money. It's mine. It's mine now. I've heard stories, actually. I don't know how true it is. It's all hearsay, anecdotal, but that there are people out there who have generated tens of thousands of wallets because there's like infinity number of wallets available. So there's never a risk of being a duplicate. And they create tons of them. And then they just plaster those addresses anywhere they can. They have bots going out and plastering it. And then they just wait to see if anybody sends them money. Like there are people on social media that are like, hey, give me your wallet address. I'll send you some money. Most of those are scammers, but there are some actually people out there that do send people money for no apparent reason. So people have shown accounts like, look at this. I've got 10,000 Monero addresses and I have like 10 Monero in here now because random people like sent money to that address. You have to imagine if somebody mistypes something or miscopies something, there's a small chance that you could win the lottery and somebody accidentally sends some crypto your way. But from my understanding, that's what most people do is they generate a new wallet for each transaction and then never use that wallet again. Because even if you kill that wallet or never use it again, it's still that address. It's still in your wallet. And then you can see send here. This is where we would paste in the recipient's address and the amount of Monero. And when you click send, it's going to tell you the gas. Well, it's not called gas, I don't think, on Monero, but the fee, the transaction fee for actually moving that money for you. I'm sure you've seen it in some cases in crypto where people charge really, really high gas rates and fees to make money, to profit. I think one of the most recent ones was that dumb meme coin Hawk Tua girl or something like that, where she created a scam coin and they made the fees really, really high. And they made over like $1 million, I think, in fees alone. And they try to justify. That guy CoffeeZilla and stuff was on him about it. They try to justify by saying they were creating the fees really high to try to stop snipers from coming in. Snipers are these people that get in really early, sometimes before the thing even goes live, and they wait. They watch during the initial hype of all that money going in, and then they just pull out all the money as quickly as possible. And then once these snipers start taking that money, then you start to see the cryptocurrency, the meme coin, tank. I mean, to be honest, anybody that invests money in a meme coin, I don't have sympathy for those people if they do. I mean, it's just dumb. In this day and age, anybody that would give money to hawk to a girl are asking to get ripped off. Now, I do feel sorry for people who are just not up. They just don't know much about it, and they get tricked into thinking it's a good idea. They're not technical, and they get scammed. Like, I feel sorry for those people, of course. But anybody that knows about this stuff and puts money into it, you're crazy. So that's pretty much the gist of Monero, though. Like, all we have to talk about, you can see transactions, no transaction history yet. We can go to settings. Here's where we can do some initial things like seed keys. So if we wanted to recover the wallet, like right here, if we click on this, it should show us our recovery words. Shows you the block number. If you ever have to rebuild your wallet, you don't want to start from zero. Let's see here, secret view, public view, view wallet only, spendable wallet. Mnemonic seed, copying your seed to clipboard. So here, right there is my mnemonic seed. So that's the 24 or whatever number of words that are associated with the key pair that was generated when I created this wallet. So if I ever lost access to this, because this is something that's happened before where somebody loses their wallet, they lock themselves out, whatever happens, this is the only way you're getting your key pair back, is if you know that. And if you lose this, there's no chance. There, I can't remember what the exact amount I heard was, but someone was telling me about the amount of Bitcoin. I think there's 21 million total Bitcoin, and something like 2 million or more Bitcoin are locked. They're lost in the ether because of this, because someone locked themselves out. You probably heard that one guy in the UK, I think he lost his hard drive and it went to a dump, and he was like trying to buy the dump, the trash dump, to have people. He said, if you can find my hard drive, I will give you a percentage of the money, because he has got tens of millions of dollars in Bitcoin locked, and it's on that hard drive that he threw away. So pretty crazy that millions of Bitcoin are lost in the ether, and that money is just sitting there. And if you could come up with the magic 24 words, you could get it. But that's the gist. I mean, it's not really much more I want to look at on Monero here. If we go down to here, switching to another public node. So it's automatically switching to another public node when we click this. There is an option, maybe this isn't the right version, but there is an option where we can actually set up a local node. Let me see here. Merchant mode, show seeding keys. I don't see it here. Interface. No, I'm not seeing it here. So it might be not on this version. Yeah. Oh, well, let's kill this. Close that out. I'm going to jump back over to the main screen here. All right. So I'm back. I can see comments now. I apologize for not looking at them for a while, but I don't know if there's many questions. I don't think there were, because you all knew I was on kind of read-only mode. But wow, we got quite a few people here. Okay, so we're close to 1,000 people. Pretty interesting. We've been going for about an hour and a half now. I'm going to stop here. When we go next, I think there'll be one more stream on the DarkNet. I'll quickly look for questions here in a moment. If you do have a question, post it now, because I'm going to jump over one more time and take a look at the Bible again and see where we're going to go next time. So I think we talked enough about cryptocurrencies and PGP. We've got shipping, harm reduction, markets, alternative communication methods, miscellaneous, closing words. So some of this stuff, let me see what the categories are. Origin countries, stealth, non-arriving, drop. We'll talk a little bit about this. I think this will be fun to talk about. because this is going to go through kind of some of the ways that people ship things. And again, I'm doing these sessions for education and for, I've been asked by a lot of law enforcement to talk about it before, just to get people up to speed on how things work. So talking about how people deal with the challenge of sending and receiving gets quite interesting from the criminal perspective. I'll talk about a couple case studies of people getting caught and how they got caught shipping, because there's a whole kind of, like, imagine if you were a seller, right? And you're sending out 10, 20 packages a day. That's going to look suspicious. I mean, yeah, there are people with home businesses that do that, but what you're doing is not ethical. And how do you go about keeping stealthy, not getting caught? You can go to different mailboxes and drop them off, different post offices. You can use FedEx versus UPS versus DHL versus some other carrier. There are legal concerns and considerations with each of those, with a private company being able to actually inspect your package without having to get a warrant. And then a postal inspector can't just go and open it, right? There has to be a warrant there. There has to be probable cause. So law enforcement, I used to work at UPS actually. I'll tell you a funny story about that. When I worked at UPS when I was really young, I was one of the people there at 3 a.m. unloading the trucks. And a lot of times law enforcement would be there with a police dog. So I'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about some shipping stuff, some people that have gotten caught, how they got caught. And then this is one I'm not going to go into. I'll just make one comment around harm reduction, and that is just don't do this stuff. Anything you buy over the internet from unethical people selling this stuff, even if they tell you something's real, there's a good chance it's not real. And these people don't care about the person buying it and the 100,000 plus deaths last year in the United States alone. That's not taking into account international, which I'm sure is also awful. But we won't talk much about that. Markets, we'll dive into that, see what it says. Alternate communication methods, we'll talk about that a bit because I'm curious to see what it says. And then we'll check out the end. But yeah, there'll be one more session on this, and then we'll be done. Next Friday, I have someone coming on to do a session on a novel Windows kernel exploitation technique using symbolic execution. I will, of course, have him on, let him demo and explain. I think it's going to be quite technical. I hope it's going to be quite technical. And then I'll put links to his papers and stuff like that, and in the description. For this guy, I'll put a couple things in the description. I'll put a link to Pharaoh, the guy that got busted from the incognito market. I'll put a link to a couple other things that I talked about. But otherwise, I'm going to stop. Multi-sig, yep. Yeah, multi-sig is interesting too. I should talk about that next time as well. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Can passphrases be safe without changing certain characters with the $1? Absolutely. I mean, again, at the end of the day, dictionary attacks work well, or worked well, when people have a single word or two. If you have a passphrase that's 10 words long and it's something, you don't want to use something obvious. You wouldn't want to use a common poem or something like that unless you change things about it, because those things are more likely going to be tried, especially if you use something that's relatable to you, that people who know you or people who look at your social media and internet presence and say, this guy obviously likes ice hockey, obviously he likes snowboarding, obviously likes this and that, and they put those words into the dictionary to aid. You need to use something that no one would ever think that you would do, that you would use, and you would change it up a bit. I gave you an example earlier of the Canterbury Tales, and I said, Juan Drapo with the Shorty Sota, the Dralta Marta Perta to the Rota, Bada every vein, switch the core, blah, 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 right? You wouldn't just take the first phrase of that and use it as is. You would at least want to reverse the order of the words, or like something I've done in the past. I've taken something like that, and I've taken the last letter of each word in the 10-word phrase, and I have a regular password and then string that on the end of it, or another passphrase and string something special in the end of it. Little things like that are going to make it so much more difficult for someone to crack it. And brute force at the end of the day is what people are left with if the dictionary attack and that rainbow tables and the hybrid attack fails. It's brute force. And if you've come up with something that's many words long and you add some more uniqueness to it, it's going to be very improbable. It's not going to be something that happens in polynomial time. All right, let's see here. Yep. Thanks. Yeah, for anybody, I hate saying that stuff, but yeah, please do like and subscribe, all that good stuff. I do appreciate it. Of course, I want the channel to grow. A lot of tech channels come on, our security channels start like after I started this one, and they fly up to over 100,000 like overnight, it seems. And mine's very slow growing, but I think it's usually due to the advanced nature of the content that we cover, which was the whole point to begin with. Oh, and I do have merch. I've got merch design finally for the channel. I've been working with the miscreants for a while to come up with some cool merch, and I'll show you the design probably on the next stream that I'm going to go and print. I'm going to take care of my mods on Discord and hook them up with a hoodie or something like that. Anything that I sell, just like with this channel, all the proceeds go straight back to the community. You've heard me say it before. I sent some people to DEF CON last year, their flights and their hotels and the entrance and everything. I use this channel as a way to give back. So when I do put the stuff up for sale for like a shirt or a hoodie, any proceeds from that is going to go straight to giving back to the community and helping people out. Because I really do sympathize and empathize with people, especially who live in parts of the world where training is very expensive. It's expensive enough if you live in the States or in England or Australia or wherever. But if you're in a country, other countries in particular, where the dollar is just very high, it's very difficult to get training. And I want to help people like that. So that's the whole point. Okay, cool. I don't see anything else. Great. I will see you guys on the next stream next Friday. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.